Moving on, let me now introduce you all to our resource speaker for today. Miss Gina Bermudo is an MA in special education, and she is also a special education advocate who is a strong advocate for making a difference in the life of children with special needs, and produces and composes songs inspired by her two sons on the spectrum. She is also a scholar who holds a master's degree in education major in special education and currently pursuing her second master's degree in education major in autism studies at the University of Massachusetts, USA. Her accolades include 2019 Most Outstanding Alumna Award in the field of special education, Outstanding Research and Presentation at the International Conference for Social Sciences and Humanities held at Harvard Medical School, Lifetime Member of the International Honor Society in Social Science Pi Gamma Mu, Member of the International Honor Society of Pi Gamma Pi, and the recipient of the Ging Talk Medallia Award. She is also a resource speaker on autism awareness, behavioral analysis, learning disabilities, and other related topics in different schools, public and private offices, and different social organizations all over Philippines. Who better than her to orient us about identification, intervention, and assessment of children with special needs? But before I hand over the podium to Gina ma'am, I'd like to share with all the participants that the current session would be for 2 hours. The session would begin with the sharing by the resource speaker, followed by the Q&A segment. While the resource speaker is on with her sharing, we would be switching to the chat to the host and the panelists so that we can all pay attention to the speaker sharing. Wish you all a happy learning, and I hand over the podium to you, ma'am. We're looking forward to broaden our understanding about identification and intervention for children with special needs. Yes, ma'am, you can take over. So all excited to learn from you. Yes.
Okay, can you see it now, Rebati?
Yes, ma'am, perfectly.
Okay, thank you, Rebati, for that introduction. As always, I feel truly honored and humbled. First, I would like to welcome you for tonight's presentation. Your quest for knowledge is really commendable. Imagine as of 2 days ago, thousands has registered, I think from several countries. So welcome, and I hope we all learn something tonight. So I would like to welcome you once again for the seminar entitled Identification, Assessment, and Intervention of Special Students in Mainstream Setting. Now, I would like to give you a recap of the previous presentation before we start. Based on some previous presentation, they addressed unique challenges faced by children with special needs. So basic framework for understanding special needs were discussed, including insights into various special needs and conditions, challenges faced by different children with special needs in different domains and its management, and unique special needs conditions in mainstream and special schooling setup. The framework is very important because we really need to understand what special needs are, who are the children with special needs, and what do we do when there are special needs. Okay, now the types of disabilities and its management in mainstream school setting were also discussed. Among them were intellectual disabilities, autism spectrum disorder, behavioral disorder, learning disabilities, and physical impairments. Now, my workshop overview, I divided it into 3 parts, which is the identification, assessment, and intervention. In the identification, we need to define the behavior. What is a behavior? We really need to know what behavior is in order for us to address it. Now, what are the common problem? What are the common problem behaviors in school setting? And then we have to identify the target behaviors. We have to zero in to what our targets are so we know what we are addressing. And then what is the operational definition? Later on, you will see the importance of operational definition into identification, assessment, and intervention program. Now, after identifying the problem, then we can do our assessment. Again, with assessment, we have to define what assessment is, who can conduct assessment, what are the purposes of assessment, kinds of assessment, and what are the tools needed for assessment. And then when we are done with identification and assessment, only then we are ready for intervention, because we cannot design an effective intervention without identification and assessment. Along with intervention, if we have the time, I can teach you with a competing behavior model and some teaching strategies. Now, children with special needs. Now, all children are capable of learning. Since we believe that every child is unique and has his or her learning style, as an educator, it is our responsibility to find out what those learnings, what those strategies are, and what strategies can help these children with special needs. So children with special need, we believe that every child is unique and special in their own way. But some children need some extra help to navigate through everyday activities. Okay, so what are the challenges faced by children with special needs? We have academic challenges. What are academic challenges? They have difficulty coping with their academics. They're getting poor grades. They have difficulty with their subjects. Now, for behavioral challenges, we have tantrums. We have getting out of seat, disruptive behaviors in classroom. Then we have socio-emotional challenges, the inability to socialize with other children. They have stress, they have depression. And then we have speech and language development challenges, their inability to express themselves, delayed language speech. And we have motor challenges. These are children with physical disabilities. For this seminar, we will focus only on behavioral challenges. Now, we are ready for identification of problem behavior. But before that, we have to define what behavior is, because behavior have different definitions also. Now, according to Cooper, Heron, and Heward from their Applied Behavioral Analysis 3rd edition, human behavior is everything people do, including how they move and what they say, think, and feel. Now, I want you to keep this in mind. There are two kinds of behavior in this definition. We have the covert behavior and the overt behavior. Covert behavior are behaviors that we cannot see, we cannot measure, we cannot observe. And overt behavior are behaviors that we can see and we can observe. Okay, so we have to keep this in mind. Now, for Johnson and Pennypacker, they do not consider covert behavior as behaviors because there is no observable or measurable interaction with the environment. So for Johnson and Pennypacker, behaviors are only those that they can observe and they can measure. And for Skinner, changes in behavior are the result of an individual's response to events, stimuli that occur in the environment. So as you can see, there are different definitions of behaviors. But to make it simple for this presentation, we will only focus with behaviors that are measurable and observable. So what behaviors do we observe in the classroom? I'll give you an example of behaviors that are non-measurable, non-observable, as opposed to behaviors that are measurable and observable. Disruptive behavior, we cannot measure. Off-task behavior, angry behavior, hostile, non-compliance, and defiance. Now, for the measurable and observable are throwing objects, getting out of seat, taking out of turn, pinching, kicking, and always late. Now, don't worry. If the behavior is not measurable and observable, we can always redefine it to make it measurable and observable. That's where the definition of behavior comes in. Operational, that's where the operational definition of the behavior comes in. Now, what are the common problem behaviors in school? For the early intervention, the most common behavior that we see are tantrums and crying. And in grade school, elopement and talking out of turn. Now, for the higher level, we have different problems. But for now, we will stick with the common problem behaviors in early intervention and grade school. So if we notice some atypical behaviors in a school setting, what do we do? The danger is when we see an atypical behavior, we do an intervention right away. No, I don't suggest that. You will see later on why. So what do we do if we see an atypical behavior? First, we observe. Okay, we observe because that behavior might not even need an intervention. For example, you see a child, student A. Student A hit student B because student B grabbed the toy of student A. That happened only once. With that, you don't need to do an intervention. But if the frequency escalates, then that is the time we need to do an intervention. So what do we do? First, we observe. Watch the behavior carefully and pay attention to details. When did it happen? How did it happen? What were the consequences? What is the frequency? What is the rate of the behavior? Then we also ask significant others. We ask the parents, we ask the caregivers, we ask the classmates and our fellow teachers. Then we verify. We compare our observation to the observation of others. This will establish the accuracy of the observation. Then we validate. We need to confirm that the behavior is really a problem behavior or it is just a one-time problem behavior. Now, what happens when behaviors are addressed without assessment? Now, I will give you an example. This is what happens when we address the behavior wrongly. For example, Juan usually gets out of his seat without any apparent reason or destination. He stops at his classmates' desk or seat and look at them to find out what they are doing before returning to his own seat. As a teacher, what will you do? Okay, can we get some answers, like 1 or 2, Rebati?
Sure, ma'am. So let's give our audience a few seconds for them to answer. So Nonachel was saying that she'll ask the child.
Ask the child, ask one, call attention to the parent, ignore. Okay, very interesting answers. We'll ask him the reason to do. Most often, when this happens and the behavior, there is already a pattern. No? One keeps on doing this, one keeps on doing this, and the teacher already gets tired. So the teacher usually sends, well, one of the intervention, the teacher sends one outside the classroom. Okay, so the teacher sends one outside the classroom as a form of punishment, or we call it time out. Okay, this is what we call time out. Now there are different kinds of time out. We have the inclusionary timeout and the exclusionary timeout. Okay, what is the difference between inclusionary timeout and exclusionary timeout? Inclusionary timeout, the child is inside the classroom. The child observes, but he cannot participate. Okay, we can also ignore the child, and then the next one is exclusionary timeout. Exclusionary timeout is we send the child outside the classroom where he cannot see what is going on. Now, this can be wrong. Why? Because even if you send the child outside for timeout, exclusionary timeout, the behavior doesn't improve. He still keeps going, doing it. He still keeps on getting out of his seat. Why? Because we did not assess the child. Now, if we assess the child, we can find out that probably the function of his behavior is escape. He finds the academic demand difficult for him. That's why he goes around to escape the academic demand. Now, if we send the child out for timeout, then we are giving him what he wants. By sending him outside, he is escaping he is escaping the academic difficulty. So he keeps on repeating it because he is getting what he wants. Okay, now, what do we do if the function of the child's behavior is escape from academic demands? Instead of sending him out, we need to break down the lessons into a smaller components, or give him an easier task, or give him accommodations by giving him extra time to work on his assignments. These are just one of the few interventions if the function is escape. Now, let's look at the same problem, the same example. Again, one usually gets out of his seat without any apparent reason or destination. He stops at his classmate's desk or seat and looks at them to find out what they are doing before returning to his own seat. Now, the teacher in this scenario, instead of sending one out, the teacher reprimands one, the teacher scolded one. But again, one still keeps on repeating what he does. Now, without the teacher realizing, by the teacher scolding one, he is enjoying the attention, because one gets out of his seat because he likes the attention from the teacher, and he likes the attention from his classmates if the teacher scolds him and his classmates laughs at him. So now the function is attention. So if the function is attention, what we can do is we ignore the child. Planned ignoring. This is called planned ignoring. There is a difference between planned ignoring and ignorance. There was a question prior to the presentation. What is the difference between ignoring and ignorance? Ignorance is you lack knowledge. You don't know anything about it. But for planned ignorance is you intentionally ignore the child. Now, if you ignore the child, then the child doesn't get the attention. And then if he doesn't get the attention, he doesn't get reinforced. So he will stop from doing what he does. Now, another one is non-contingent reinforcer. What is a non-contingent reinforcer? Like if the child is not, if the child is behaving, now then we can just give him social praises. Wow, one, very good, you're not standing up. Wow, one, very good, you're not standing up. We can do that regularly, or like every 10 minutes or every 15 minutes. Then we can give him an alternative behavior to get attention correctly. One, if you want attention, then please raise your hand. So it's an alternative behavior. Now, before we proceed, let's do a synthesis. What I planned was to give you a synthesis per subtopic for you to be able to comprehend, because this topic is a bit technical. So in case you have questions, please feel free to type in your question, and Rebati can read it to me. If I can give you feedback right away, I will do so. Otherwise, I will answer you at the end of the session. So what we have discussed so far: what is a behavior, the definition of a behavior, what are problems behavior, what happens when we identify the wrong function of the behavior. If we identify the wrong function of the behavior, then we get an undesired effect. Now we can proceed. Now we know the definition of behavior. Now we identify the target behavior. In identifying the target behavior, as discussed in the examples, we need to know the function and the topography of the behavior. So what is the function? Why do they do that? Why do they keep repeating the behavior? What do they get out of it? That is the function. And then the topography is the shape of the behavior. Now, when I say topography, example, the child cries in the classroom, then you have to describe what crying is. That is the topography. So it is very important in identifying the target behavior. Function and topography is what we need to look for. Now, aside from the function and topography, we also need to operationally define the behavior. Why do we need to operationally define the behavior? So that everyone in the whole team is on the same page. Okay, you will see later on why. Now, to operationally define the behavior, we need to do that because we need to be very, very specific on what behavior are we trying to address. And it is easy to communicate. For example, two teachers are observing a student who cries regularly, and they need to get the frequency of that behavior. So they need to tally it down. But again, one teacher only tallies it down if there are tears, if she can observe tears, while the other one, she records the behavior even if the child is just whining. So from there, you can not get a consistent data because the definition of the behavior is not the same. There is no operational definition. That's why they are collecting different data. So when the data are different, we cannot come up with an effective assessment. So now it's when the behavior is operationally defined, then it is easier and simpler to measure and record, and our data is more precise. Now with operationally defined behavior, we can monitor our treatment fidelity. What is treatment fidelity? Treatment fidelity is implementing an assessment or a program or an intervention the way it was designed. Okay, so now, example of operational definition. Crying. To operationally define crying, we can say the occurrence of vocalization, sounds or words accompanied by facial distortion with or without tears for any period of time. So with that, anyone can collect data because the definition is very clear. Now, there is no specific definition for each behavior. It depends on what we want to observe. So we can operationally define a behavior depending on what do we want to observe or what do we show? What does the child show? What do we see from the child? Now, for the off-task behavior, another example of operational definition for off-task behavior, engagement in any task other than assigned task or ongoing activity for more than 2 minutes. See, it's very clear. Anyone can measure the behavior. The last operational definition example is disruptive. Disruptive. If you say disruptive, that is very vague, and it's an open-ended behavior. So if we want to operationally define it, we can say displacing school materials and classmates belonging from their original location. That is disruptive. Now, you already have an idea what operational definitions are. So for the synthesis, we already know what behavior is. Example is constant crying in class. The target behavior is crying, and then that we can operationally define the behavior. So once the behavior is operationally defined, then we are ready for assessment. Now, I'll give you one minute. Can you operationally define getting out of seat? Rebati?
Yes. Participants, you can drop in your inputs in the chat box. So we have Zairine who says move around the room.
Zairine, yes. Zairine Tricia Claros, thank you so much. Moving around the room. Yes, that is operational definition. As long as he is inside the classroom, go from seat, yes, standing, leaving the chair and standing and moving. Very good definition, Anuja Bali. Very good. One who usually goes from so fast now from one place to another. See, now each of you has their own definition. Again, in defining a behavior, it has to be very, very specific. See, okay, there is no one definition. Okay, wandering around the classroom. Judeline Labrado, wandering around the classroom, very good. Standing during class, so very good. So now you get the idea. You get the idea what operationally define a behavior is. So now we can proceed. We can proceed to assessment because now you can, as of now, you can already identify the behavior. and then you can operationally define the behavior. Now you are ready for the next step, which is the assessment. Now, what is assessment? Okay, what is assessment? Assessment is comprehensive. Assessment should be comprehensive and individualized. Okay, it is not templated. Okay, every child has their own needs. Every child, they have their own special needs. So therefore, they have their own special assessment. Now, assessment helps us develop and validate a hypothesis. So what is hypothesis? For example, using our example of one gets, the first example, one gets out of his seat because he wants to escape the academic demand. That is a hypothesis. Now, we validate if that hypothesis is true using an assessment. Okay, so when doing assessment, again, you have to look beyond the form of the behavior. You have to look for the function. Now, assessment is a proper collection of data. In assessment, everything is data-based because with data, you can easily see if the child is improving and if your intervention is effective. So the only way for you to validate that is by gathering data, arranging data, and interpreting the data properly and accurately. Now, in interpretation and use of information in regards to learning. Again, this is the data interpretation. We need to interpret the data. So everything is data-based. So what is important with assessment? It has to be individualized. It has to be backed by data. Because with data, you are making a decision based on what you observe, based on what you see, not based on your instinct. So when to conduct an assessment? You conduct an assessment if the behavior is disruptive, if the behavior interferes with learning, and if the behavior interferes with the learning of others. And I would like to add, if the behavior is a danger to the environment. Okay, that's when you conduct an assessment. So now, my dear teachers and attendees, who can conduct an assessment? Okay, so with training and support, assessment can be conducted by their teachers, therapists, and other professionals. However, some behavioral assessment procedures, such as standardized tests or experimental functional analysis, may require an individual with specific training and license. 2 weeks ago, I think Dr. Grace Gomez made a very good presentation about standardized testing. So with Dr. Grace's presentation, that was about standardized testing. But for this presentation, we will discuss about assessment that do not need any license, an assessment that you teachers can do. So what are the kinds and purposes of assessment? As a teacher, we all have been doing assessments already in the classroom. We have formative assessment, summative assessment, and evaluative assessment. Now, when these regular assessments are not enough, then that's the time we can do a specific assessment called diagnostic. So for the formative assessment, what is the primary objective of formative assessment? The primary objective is to help the students achieve their goals, which is to learn and apply what they learn in the classroom. When is it done? Throughout the course. How? Through quizzes, projects, recitations, and any recitations, group works. So these are the way to identify gaps and improve their learning. And how? Now, this is done. Okay, so where is it? What happened? Okay. Just a minute. Sorry about that. So, okay, so formative. So formative is needed to support specific needs of the students. We identify the gaps, and once the gaps are identified, we try to fill in these gaps. Now, the next assessment is summative. So summative is to assess the student's performance. When is it given? At the end of the instructional period. How? We collect evidences of students' knowledge, skills, or proficiency. So when do we give the summative assessment? During midterms exam or final exams. So we try to gather all the portfolio of the student, and we will try to assess it cumulatively. And then the evaluative. What is an evaluative assessment? Evaluative is to check if the student is capable of learning. This is when the grades are given, and then we check if the student is ready to level up. Again, how do we check it? Through tests and computation of grades. Now, if the formative, summative, and evaluative assessments did not meet the criteria, then we recommend a diagnostic assessment. But my dear teachers, before you do any assessment, you have to ask permission from the parents and check their resources. Can they afford it? Because they need to buy some materials, probably. And then, do you have the skill to do the assessment? Okay. Now, before doing an academic or educational assessment, you need to do a medical diagnostic first. Because if medical variables are affecting the behavior, then there may be no need for behavior change intervention. Example, one of your students keeps on shouting in class at the top of her voice. Now, you cannot address that if her issue is about her hearing. If she has hearing impairment, then no amount of intervention can address that. Okay, we need to address it medically first. Again, another example. If the child is failing on her grades, okay, now we cannot address that if the issue is visual acuity. So we need to get some eyeglasses first. With that eyeglasses, that will probably solve the issue. Now, on the other hand, if medical variables are not affecting the behavior, then there may be a need for behavior change intervention. So, after the medical diagnosis, we do the educational diagnosis. So, find out what is causing the problem. So, when do we do this? Like I said, after the formative and summative and evaluative evaluation. Then why do we do educational diagnostic? To address the specific issue. And how do we do it? We need to determine the strengths and the weaknesses of the child for us to be able to address it. Now, why do we need to determine the strengths and the weaknesses of the child? We need the strengths and maintain those strengths. And for the weaknesses, we try to improve those weaknesses and turn them into strengths. Now, synthesis. After you're done with formative, summative, and evaluative, and the child did not meet the criteria, then you do diagnostics. And in that diagnostic, you do medical first before you do educational. Because with the medical assessment, you might not even need to do an educational assessment anymore. Now, after the diagnostic, whether both educational assessment or medical evaluation, what do we know? What do we know? Now we know what we are dealing with. Now we can validate the hypothesis. Now we can determine the function of the behavior. And with that, we can design a better program for behavior intervention. And then we can develop a better IEP and a placement program. So now, what are the types of assessment? Now, the types of assessment, we have the direct and indirect assessment. Again, my dear teachers, Please listen, because these are the things that you can do. Okay, so direct assessment and indirect assessment. So, okay, what is an indirect assessment? Indirect assessment is a little bit subjective, because you as a teacher will review the records, medical records, school records, whatever records, to help you understand the behavior. This you have to coordinate with the parents. Okay, so you can also interview the parents using a checklist or scales. No, so whatever it is, this is subjective. Now, the other assessment is direct assessment. Direct assessment is after getting all the details from the parents, from the indirect assessment, then you can observe the child yourself. See if what you observe align with the information that you gathered from the indirect assessment. So now, knowing what direct and indirect assessment is, so can we read this and you tell me what kind of assessment is this? So we'll read it together. Sarah is one. First, I would like to thank Bill Slosser because I got this from him. So Sarah is one of my new students. I first met her for basic personal and behavioral information. Her parents reported that Sarah's behaviors at school were very disruptive. Again, what is disruptive? This is not operationally defined. So it's very difficult for us to understand what does that mean. So we have to operationally define that. And she was often sent to the school office because of those behaviors. With the parents' consent, I went to the school and asked about the former teacher, and Sarah was always uncooperative, yelling, kicking, and throwing school supplies. And that happened every day, an hour before lunchtime. So is that a direct or indirect assessment? Okay, so it's moving so fast. So okay. So now the answer is, okay, the answer is indirect assessment. Whoever answered indirect is so fast, I cannot catch up on you anymore. So Teacher Leia answered, she answered indirect assessment. Yes, it's indirect assessment. Why? Because you did not directly observe the child. You just went to the teacher and interviewed the teacher about the behavior. See, direct assessment when you directly observe the child. In this case, you did not directly observe the child. You went to the teacher and asked the teacher. Okay, so now you know. So what are the tools needed for assessment? Now, you don't need to buy tools. Again, my dear teachers, there are so many you can download from the internet. Now, there are different kinds of tools. We have the informal tools and the formal tools. Now, as we mentioned earlier about indirect assessment being subjective and direct assessment being objective. Now, in doing your indirect or direct assessment, there are tools that can guide you, or there are tools that can help you. Okay, so what are they? For the indirect assessment, you may use interviews. You can design your own questions. Or not, you can download from the internet. Then you may use checklists, you may use rubrics, you may use forms, and you may use surveys. For the direct assessments, which is more objective, you need to observe the child using an ABC narrative, ABC continuous recording, and scatter plot. Don't worry, I will discuss these tools one by one. Now, the difference between informal tools and formal tools can only give you approximation, while formal tools are more precise. Example of the formal tools are FBA, verbal behavior, Brigance, among others. Again, don't worry, I will discuss this with you. Now, what are rubrics? Now, rubrics uses a set criteria to evaluate a student's performance. Okay, it consists of a fixed measurement scale and detailed description of the characteristic for its level of performance. Now, this focuses on quality, not quantity. When to use and why? To let the student know what is expected of them and to demystify grades by clearly stating it. Okay, demystifying is making it more clear. So this is an example of a simple behavior rubrics. It can be complicated, no? But I want to show you the simple ones. Now for checklists, we all know what a checklist is. A list of everything that needs to be done. When to use it, behavior that needs multiple steps, behavior that needs a yes or no answer, or behavior that needs a reminder. And a rating scale. Now, a rating scale, it indicates the degree of frequency of the behavior skills and strategies, and it provides a range of performance level. It uses descriptive words such as always, usually, sometimes, and never. So when to use it, the teachers can use it to record observation, while the student uses it for self-management. Now, for the informal tools, direct assessment, in observing the child, we can use ABC recording, ABC narrative, and scatter plot. Again, you can download this in the internet. What is an ABC recording? An ABC recording is similar to checklist. You have the predetermined antecedent, and then the behavior, and then the consequent. What is an antecedent? An antecedent is what triggered the behavior, what happened before the behavior, and the consequence, what happened after the behavior. So ABC recording is like a preset, no? It's a preset checklist where the antecedents are there, the behaviors are there, and the consequences are there. All you need is just to check it. For an ABC narrative is you observe the child and you write it down when the behavior appears. And scatter plot is you take the record of the behavior within the day and see to it that the behavior, and you look for the relationship between the behavior and the environment. Now, again, what are the tools for indirect assessment? Can I get some answers, a few answers? Okay, rubrics, very good. Dawa, very good. Lenny Limpoco, very good. Jenny, Lenny, Ruchi, Clarissa, Vidya, Audrico, Susma, Mary Jane, all very good. At least you're listening, I'm happy. What about tools for direct assessment? Direct assessment. Okay, ABC recording, very good. Interview, so fast, Clarice, I can't catch up anymore. So very good, very good. At least you're all listening. So ABC recording, thank you so much. Now, we are done with the direct, indirect assessment and direct and the informal assessment. Now we go to formal assessment. With the formal assessment, you need some training. Okay, so some of the formal assessments that I will discuss with you because are FBA, VBMAP, and Brigance. Why I selected this? Because these assessment tools are evidence-based and these are scientifically validated. There are a lot, no? But I selected those because they are reliable and very valid. Okay, so functional behavioral assessment in terms of reliability and validity, FBA is rooted in more than 50 years of behavioral research. And in recent years, research has focused on the use of FBA methods in typical schools. Now, IDEA stipulates that school personnel must complete FBA and behavior plan when students are at risk. Okay, what does that mean? In the States, if the child is absent for 10 consecutive days, then he has to undergo a functional behavioral assessment. Or the students are at risk for extended suspension, then they need to go for functional behavioral assessment. And because of that, there has been a recent influx of research supporting the value of FBA. Okay. That's why I want to teach you this functional behavioral analysis, because This is the thing that you can do in school. So what is a functional behavioral assessment? It's a process of identifying problem behavior and determining environmental events that predicts and maintains them. Okay, big words, but what does that mean? You just need to identify the function of the behavior. Again, as mentioned in our previous example. So who can administer functional behavioral assessment? In most cases, the student support team is responsible for conducting the FBA. Who are they? School psychologists, teachers, counselors, and paraprofessionals. Now, probably in my future seminars, we can discuss FBA in depth for you to be able to learn and apply it in your own schools. Now, how to conduct behavioral assessment? Again, you do a functional behavioral assessment. How? Through indirect assessment using interviews, checklists, rubrics, surveys, among others. And then you can do a direct assessment using observations and tests. Now, for the functional analysis, I don't recommend this to you yet because you need a special training for that. But indirect assessment and direct assessment are more than enough for you to come up with a hypothesis or validate your hypothesis. Now, VB-MAP, again, a very interesting assessment tool. VB-MAP, okay, it has been reviewed and evaluated in terms of their utility for the signing comprehensive early interventive behavior intervention curriculum program for children with ASD. In short, 30 assessment tools were evaluated. And among the 30 tools evaluated, only 5 met the 5 criteria. What were those criteria? Comprehension, target child development, function of the behavior, not just topography, link of assessment to curricular targets, and tracking child's progress. So only 5 assessment tools met the 5 requirements among the 30 being researched or studied. Among them are VB-MAP, Brigance, IED2, VABS, and CBISR. And in this seminar, I will be discussing 3. But FBA is not included in this study, so it's a different research. But in this particular research, VB-MAP and Brigance are included, and I will be discussing them with you. So what is VB-MAP? VB-MAP was developed by Mark Sundberg, and he's a licensed psychologist with over 40 years of experience. Now, VB-MAP is very, very useful for children who are nonverbal. Okay, there are 5 components of VB-MAP. Number 1 is a milestone assessment. So what is a milestone assessment? Again, it checks what are the strengths and weaknesses of the child. What are the existing verbal language skills of the child? And then another component is the barrier. What are the barriers of the assessment? Is it a behavioral problem? Is it instructional problem? Is it defective verbal behavior, generalization, or discrimination, among others? And then transition. Is it a transition assessment that is the problem? Or is it a task analysis or placement? So there are 5 components of a VB-MAP. And I highly recommend this for children who are non-vocal and non-verbal. So again, who can administer a VB-MAP? A skilled professional. Again, anyone with the VB-MAP training. Again, probably in the future, I hope that I can give you a specific training on how to administer VB-MAP. And then you have to familiarize yourself with the verbal behavior and analysis of verbal behavior and basic behavioral analysis by Skinner and Sundberg. But again, in this seminar, I will briefly discuss with you what a verbal behavior is. Now, before going into a verbal behavior, we have to differentiate between a vocal and a verbal behavior. When we say vocal, it means we make sounds with the vocal musculature to affect another person. Example is talking. When we talk, we use our vocal cords. So that is vocal. vocal behavior. Now, what is verbal behavior? Verbal behavior is writing, gesturing, signing, and finger spelling. If we don't have a vocal behavior, then we can use a verbal behavior. So if a child cannot speak, it doesn't mean that the child cannot communicate. If the child has no vocal behavior, then he or she can communicate using other means, such as writing, gesturing, signing, or finger spelling. So we shouldn't limit the child, in terms of communication. Now, for verbal behavior, there are 6 elementary operands, but some with extensions. But for now, for the purpose of simplifying it, I will only discuss 4. Okay, so verbal behavior is a technique of teaching children who are limited vocally or children who are nonverbal. Okay, we can make them, this is the way of, teaching them how to communicate with us. Now, we have the mand, echoic, intraverbal, and tact. What is a mand? Okay, mand is we teach the child to command, to demand, or reprimand. Okay, so now the antecedent control in layman's term, this is not an exact parallelism, but antecedent control could be a trigger, could be a cue, could be a trigger, could be a cue. Okay, now, what is the antecedent control for man? It's motivation. Example, if a child wants an apple, he is motivated to get that apple. So you use that motivation for the child to speak. Instead of giving the child the apple, you encourage the child to demand by saying, I want an apple. It could be vocally or verbally, it does not matter. If he can say, I want apple, go ahead. If he points to that apple, you give it to her. Okay? So if he gestures to the apple, you give it to her. As long as the child can command, can reprimand, can say what she wants, you give it to her. So you capitalize on the motivation. Now, if the child has, again, if the child can communicate vocally, then you can use echoic. So you say apple, and the child will imitate you also by saying apple. Again, there are other ways of echoing. We call it duplicate because you duplicate. Apple, when you say apple, the child will duplicate apple. There are other ways of duplicating. It's not only echoic. We can duplicate through gestural or through writing, but I will not discuss now. Okay, now the next one is intraverbal. Intraverbal is you already have communication exchanges. If the child can communicate vocally, then if the child wants apple, then you ask the child, do you want an apple? Then the child will say, yes, please. That is intraverbal. And the next one is tact. What is tact? It is labeling. So what is your antecedent control? It's either a picture or the object itself. You show the child a picture or an object, and then the child will tact apple. So, okay, this is one of the techniques of teaching the child how to express himself verbally or vocally. This is a very interesting topic, and I hope that I can discuss it with you thoroughly some other time. Okay, so the next tool, the next formal tool is Brigance. Okay, Brigance, what is a Brigance? Okay, Brigance is a screening tool widely used by schools for students in pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, and first grade. It is not an IQ test nor a full-scale educational assessment. It's a norm reference test that compares each child's results, performance, and other examinees. So Brigance testing covers a variety of base curriculum. Many schools uses this screening tool to identify incoming students who may be at risk for learning difficulties. So if you see that the child is at risk, then they can benefit from the Brigance assessment. And the test has the capability to also indicate if the child is above average, because children who are above average, they also need our support. Now, who can administer Brigance? A reading specialist, the classroom teacher, or school psychologist. So in looking for a measurement, in looking for tools, you have to check the validity. Is the tool measuring what you intend to measure? Then you also have to check for accuracy. Does the data match what actually occurred? Is it accurate? Example, the child slept for 20 minutes in class and you recorded 20 minutes. The other teacher recorded only 10 minutes. When you check your watch, the battery is weak. Therefore, your measurement is not accurate. So you have to check for accuracy. And reliability, okay? It has to be reliable, meaning if you measure that data repeatedly, does it yield the same result? So again, you have to look for that. You have to look for that in checking for a tool. Now, what to look for in a tool? Quickly, because we are running out of time. Okay, very good. Goma, very good. Charis, very good. Aimi, very good. Saranya, very good. Now, with that, what are the roles? Now, in assessment, in identification of problem, in assessment and intervention, we all have roles to play. Parents have roles to play. No? So the parents, what you do, everything starts with a suspicion. When you suspect something, you have to get an assessment right away. You have to seek professionals' help. And then you seek knowledge and empower yourself. You review, you study. What is it all about? What can I do about it? And then you connect with families with the same problem. And then you read books and accounts written by others. But most importantly, you have to document your child's behavior. Again, data is very important. I want to put emphasis on data. Okay, and then take an active role and work with teachers. Now, but in order for you to help your children, you have to know also what kind of parent are you. Are you authoritative? Are you authoritarian? Are you pessimist? Or you just don't care? You have to understand, do you demand, are you a caring parent, but your demands are high? Are you a disciplinarian, but your demands are high? Do you not care? So you have to know what kind of parent are you for you to be able to help your child. But again, this is from me. So according to Randy Alcorn, do not give everything that your child wants. Okay, why? Because the greatest form of child abuse is giving everything that your child wants. No, try not to do that, please. If when in doubt, get for an assessment. No, sometimes what I hear from parents is, okay, oh, I pity my child. He doesn't need assessment. I just give him whatever it is that he wants. This will help him develop even more. No, you are abusing the child without you realizing it. Now, what is the teacher's role in early identification in intervention? Teachers, please, you have to detect a typical behavior right away. Detect the problem and identify internal and external behavior. Once you see something suspicious, you have to report it right away. If the parents do not want to listen to you, at least you did your part. You reported it, or you reported it to your supervisor or to your principal. Detect the red flags of neurodevelopmental disabilities and social emotional disabilities. And then you must be ready also to refer the children to a specialist. Okay? Now, parent-teacher partnership is so important in a child's development, whether the child is a neurotypical or special. Because with parent-teacher partnership, there is a better learning and instruction. And then the most important thing is there is consistency of program implementation. And then there is also, if the child can see the parent and teacher cooperating, then the child will have an increased motivation. And then there is also an accountability and support. And most importantly, there is an open line for communication. So now, before I end, I hope that these are your takeaway, key takeaway. Identification, assessment, and intervention, they go hand in hand. Now, for identification, early intervention is the key to a successful intervention. Now, once you identify the behavior, only then you can do your assessment. Now, there are a lot of assessment tools for problem identification. And assessment is necessary for you to accurately validate the hypothesis. In validating hypothesis, data is very, very important. Okay? Use your data to make a decision. Do not use your gut feel or your instinct to make a decision. You always back it with data. And with identification and assessment, you can design a very good intervention program. Because why? You were able to define the behavior, you define the behavior, you operationally define the behavior, you validated your hypothesis. Then with that, you can come up with a very good and effective intervention. Now with that, I would like to end my talk. I hope that you learned something, and thank you very much for being there.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this wonderful session. We had a lot to learn from you. You've opened us the whole facets of assessment, what it encompasses. I think this cannot be covered in one session, but it's just a plethora of options that are available. You've laid the foundation very, very strongly for all of us. Before we begin with the Q&A segment for today, I'd like to take our participants through a few things. If you could stop sharing, ma'am.
I'll stop. Okay, just a minute.
Yeah.
Okay.
So dear participants, I'd like to take you through the upcoming events that we have as part of our ability. We're going to launch our module 3, the workshop 1, which will focus on the heart of an educator, which should be conducted by Dr. Amba Sethi, which will happen on the 7th of October. Followed by that, we have another event on the 12th of October by Ms. Mala Saraswati Nair on what is an inclusion school and what are its benefits. Both events would happen 4 p.m. Indian time, 5:30 p.m. Indonesian time, and 6:30 p.m. Singapore or Philippines time. The link for the same is being shared right now in the chat box. Do take a moment and register yourself, and also don't forget to share the link with anyone who you think would benefit from the event so that they can also have learning from our expert speakers. Moving on. Now I'm going to take you all through how is that you'll be able to register and do a lot more things from our platform. All you have to do is go on and click on to app.ability.com. Use your login credential and log into your personal account. And from there, whichever workshop is of interest to you, you will just be able to register to any workshop that is of interest to you by clicking on this register for this event button. Not only that, if you have certain questions which are very specific to the topic, you will be able to drop your questions on the questions sub-tab by just posting your question here. If you don't have any question, you can glance through the questions which are submitted by our other participants, and you can upvote them so that the question which is getting most upvotes will be prioritized and be answered by the speakers. And not only this, we also have an interesting provision. Members who are with us for a very long time would know that as part of each of the workshops that you attend, Ability will also be sharing certain exclusive resource materials that you can use with your children in different settings. So as part of this workshop, you will also be receiving certain resource material, the link for which is also being shared with you all right now. Do check out all the resources, rate the resources, like the resources if you feel that's beneficial to you, and share the resources with anyone who will benefit from it. Finally, for the resources and for the events which are of interest to you, you will also be able to find events which are of the related or similar nature, which you'll be able to check in your related events section. And also for events that you have attended with Ability, you would be able to keep a track of them in events and my events tab, so that you will be able to keep track of all the events that you have attended. So I'm sure in one place you would be able to do much more than registering for event and benefit a lot from all the learning that's going to happen. We wish you all a happy learning and wishing to see you all in our future events also. Now let's begin with our Q&A session for today. Ma'am, are you ready to take the first question that we have?
But Revati, just 1 second, please, because I saw a very interesting question. Yeah. It might before we start. No, this is from McKenna. She says, unfortunately, most of the countries in the world only allows the professional psychiatrist to assess a child of their disabilities. Okay, McKenna, I think traditionally this that's why we need to, how shall I say this, spread awareness. We need to spread awareness that there are different kinds of assessment. Psychiatrists, yes, we need also psychiatric. We can go to a psychiatrist if we need psychiatric assessment. We can go to a psychologist if we need this kind of assessment. We go to this if we need that kind of assessment. So it all depends on the need. So now, for example, if you have a kidney problem, why do you go to a heart doctor if you have a kidney problem? Now, if you need a psychiatrist, yes, by all means, because psychiatrists, we need the psychiatrist to assess us. But if our issue is not psychiatric, then we have to go to a professional who can diagnose or who can help us identify what problem do we have and how can we solve that problem. So let us, I hope that we can spread awareness that there are different kinds of assessment, like there are different kinds of sickness. So we have to match the assessment with the need. Okay, I hope that answers your question, McKenna. Thank you very much. So now, Revati, okay, we can go now.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing that lovely insight, because a lot of time there is a lot of confusion and on where the boundary lies, what kind of assessment can be done. Thank you for clarifying it right away. Let's take with the next question, which is from Miss Adishri, who wants to know that is there any online assessment tools that are available to help children or identify children with special needs?
There are from where is that question? From whom? From?
I think Adishri is a teacher. So
okay.
She would like to know certain assessment tools which are available online. And you can share both the insights, ma'am, for professionals as well as teachers, so that everybody would benefit from it.
Okay. Online, like I said, online, there are a lot of assessment tools online. Okay. You can download depending on your need. But in choosing for assessment online, you have to be very, very careful. You have to check if that assessment that you downloaded is, again, like I said, is it scientifically proven? Does it measure the data accurately, validly, or reliably? Now, if you want, I can recommend assessment. Again, it depends on what assessment do you want. If you want a developmental assessment, criterion assessment, or norm reference assessment. But you can start with the CDC developmental milestone. You can download that, please. You can write it down. It's a CDC developmental milestone. CDC means Center for Disease and Control Prevention. Because with the CDC, you can determine if the child is developing at par with her age level. So that you can, from there, you can tell if, again, if the child is developing normally or not. So CDC is a good start.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I'm sure that will benefit a lot of participants. Next, we have a question from Miss Andrea, Maria, and multiple others who wants to know, are there certain assessments that teachers and special educators can know or have, which will help them to determine to know if the child is ready for mainstream schooling? We discussed about a lot of assessments in our discussion today. So are there any specific ones which will help them to know whether the child is ready for mainstream schooling?
Well, ideally, I say Brigance. Brigance, because it gives you an inventory of skills in early childhood education and special education. And with Brigance, you can screen the child developmentally. You can determine the present level of performance of the child. And then it is also a criterion reference inventory, meaning it measures the child's performance, and then it compares the past and the present performance. And it is also a norm reference inventory. So, I mean, when you say norm reference inventory, it compares the child's performance relative to children, her level of age group. However, Brigance is a bit pricey. Brigance is expensive. That's why, again, if your school cannot afford the Brigance, then you can start with the CDC developmental milestone. So I hope that answers your question, because Brigance is very good, but it's very expensive. So I think it's $1,500. I'm not sure for the whole set.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sure that this alternative that you've given to the participants will give them as a set of guidelines on what are the criteria to look for. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for sharing that. Next, we have a question from Miss Rosa Anna, who wants to know what are some of the tips that you can actually share with teachers, especially to help children with special needs interact and participate in classroom learning during an online session.
Okay. Again, that is case-to-case basis, but I can give you three. I can give you three that I myself find it very, very useful. Now, number one, make it interactive and child-centered. So when you're doing an online, it's so difficult to there's no way for us to physically monitor them. So the only way for us to get their attention is to make the lesson very, very interactive and child-centered. Like I discussed in the verbal behavior, you check what motivates the child. And you use that as your lessons point of reference. And then interaction is the key. Next, you have to create short courses. So you have to task analyze your lesson. Don't make it long. When I do my lesson, I make it short, and then I give a break, and then I make it short and then break. So I interspear break in between lessons. And then number three is supplement it visually. You have to give a lot of visual lessons. So to summarize it, make it interactive and child-centered. Number two, create short courses. And number three, you have to supplement it visually. There are so many tips and techniques, but those three, we find it very effective. We find it most effective.
Wonderful, ma'am. Putting everything together into three broad areas and trying to cover a lot more aspects. I think a lot of teachers would benefit from it. Next, we have a question from Ms. Erin Nasser, who wants to know, given that we're all in online setup and online teaching right now, how is that we'll be able to accurately identify the challenge, especially behavioral challenges of children online? Because most times what happens, even if we know the child has some challenges behaviorally, but because the child is well performing and only the grades are being focused upon in online teaching, the parents are also in denial when we actually mention certain things, and even we as teachers are not able to get the nitty-gritties or find out the behaviors which are very crucial. So how is that we can address both of it, ma'am? If you can share some light.
Now I will give you again a technique on how to understand the behavior very well. In order for you to understand the behavior, you just need to understand the function. What is the function of the behavior? Why the child keeps on repeating that behavior? Again, there are only 4 functions of behavior, and it's so easy for you to understand that. What are the 4 functions of behavior? Escape. Is the child escaping because he is avoiding the task, or the academic demand is too difficult for him? So if that happens, the child escape. And then number 2 is attention. Is the child doing that because he needs attention? Or is the child doing that because he needs an object, he needs something tangible? Or is it sensorial? Is it something medical? See, those are only the 4 functions of the behavior. Now you check, what is the function of the behavior? Once you determine the function of the behavior, and then you can design the intervention easily. Without you identifying the functions of the behavior, you cannot really address the behavior the way you want it to. Probably you can address it temporarily, but it will go back. So again, the technique there is you try to understand the function of the behavior. Now, what are the tools that you can use? I think this is more important for you. What are the tools you need to identify the functions of the behavior? Because as a teacher, you need a place to start. You need somewhere to start. Now, you can write it down. You can use MAS. These are very easy, only 16 questions. And then from there, you can determine the function of the behavior. You can write this down: MAS, Motivation Assessment Scale; FAST, Functional Analysis Screening Tool; and FAI, Functional Analysis Interview. You can start with those 3. Very, very simple, easy to use. And then with those three, you can already determine the functions of the behavior. And you can do this without license. And you can do this also without training. You just fill up the form. It is all downloadable. So I hope you got that. MAS, FAST, and FAI.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think this will benefit a lot of people from the community per se, because you've been sharing a lot of reference in terms of what they can refer to. We have a question on the similar lines from Ms. Shireen, who wants to know if you can share certain books for reading more about assessment and identification of children with special needs. That would be of great help. Is there any books that they can refer to as further read-ups or reading materials?
Now, again, it depends what are you assessing. Like I said, it depends what are you assessing. Are you assessing strengths and weaknesses or the present level of performance of the child? Are you assessing delayed language? Okay, are you assessing giftedness? Are you assessing mainstreaming readiness? So it all depends on what you want. Again, to start, I think you can find it in the internet, some trainings about, you may use VBMAP. I think they have it in the internet. There are some free trainings on VBMAP. VBMAP is very good for 0 to, I think, 5 years old or more. And then you can check. Now, if you want, you may use, you can check VBMAP if you want. And then there is also a very good, you can write this down. This is very good for functional behavioral assessment. The Carbone method. You can use that. It's all there. This is what you need. This is the functional behavioral assessment. Use the Carbone method. CARBONE. The steps are there, the steps and how you do it. How do you make a report? Indirect assessment, direct assessment, functional analysis. I think even the risk and assessment benefits are there. Okay, I hope you got that.
Yes, ma'am. So I'd repeat for the audience, Carbone method is the book that she's referring to. And also the scales which were shared by ma'am was MAS, which is motivational assessment scale, FAST, which is your functional assessment screening tool, and FAI, right, ma'am? These were the tools that were shared by you. I'd also request one of my team member to kindly draft this and put it on the chat box so that participants can actually refer to it. We have next question from Ms. Ivy, who would like to know, because you mentioned a lot of online platforms having certain assessment tools or checklists, right? This question is in line to it. Sometimes some platforms do have a lot of criteria which are given. So how does that we know whether it's authentic and reliable? Because we spoke about the major components of what is required to find in a tool. So how is that we'll differentiate that, ma'am?
So that's why you have to check. No, the only way for you to find out is to check. There are a lot of scientific journal there that validates the effectivity and the authenticity of these tools. Now, a good place for you to start to check if the interventions are valid and the assessment are valid is, I think, you use the national NAS. I forget what it is. It's National Statistics. I forget. I can, if I remember, I'll tell you. But in the internet, there is a book there, or it is free. It's downloadable. All the evidence-based practices and interventions are there. I think as of now, there are 26 evidence-based practices approved. So you may use that. I highly recommend that, in using anything, whether assessment or intervention, you have to validate and verify that it is evidence-based. There's a question here, Revati, had just again a long question from Joseph Alexander. I did not read it yet, but it's long. So this is with regard to the verbal and vocal behaviors. Number one, some children behaviors, both vocally and verbally, good at home, but in the school, colleges are very bad. So what do you mean by that? Is it the language? Is it the language, or they can speak at home or they cannot speak in school? Okay, I need to know that, because it says some children behavior both vocally and verbally good at home, but in school, colleges very bad. So what do you mean? Can they speak at home, but in school they cannot? And then number two, some children's behavior both vocally and verbally bad at home, but very good in the school, colleges. Some children behavior, okay, some children behavior are verbally good at home. Okay, now, Joseph Alexander, I don't know what you mean. If you mean that they can speak at home and they cannot speak in school, or they say bad words at home or they say bad words at school. But I would like to address the first one. In case the children can speak at home or they cannot speak in school, or it's the other way around, they can speak in school but they cannot speak at home. Now, the problem is no longer about verbal or vocal behavior, I think, because they can speak, only they don't want to speak. So the problem there is generalization. They need to learn how to generalize. What do I mean by generalization? We have to teach them that if they cannot speak, that if they can speak at home, they could also speak in school. They have also speak outside, they speak in church, they speak everywhere. So that is not a vocal or verbal behavior anymore. The problem there is generalization. We have to teach the child to generalize, to be able to manifest the same behavior wherever he goes. So I think that is the answer there. It's generalization.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think the participant would benefit from that sharing. On the same lines, we have another question because we're talking in detail about assessment per se. So right after assessment, what is the next step?
Intervention.
Yeah. So what are certain key components that any professional should keep in mind while they're actually formulating or starting to formulate intervention right after assessment? If you can share certain insights, that will be beneficial to the community, ma'am.
Because I think that intervention will be another topic, no? But again, okay, just before I answer that, there's a follow-up here from Dawa. It says, might be due to lack of social skills. Dawa, the lack of social skills, yes, because lack of social skills is, again, lack of generalization. Okay, so I hope that answers your question, Dawa. Now, Revati, the question, what was the question again? Sorry.
So what is a step right after assessment? Though intervention is a vast subject in itself, if you could share certain important points that the educators and professionals need to keep in mind, it would be very helpful for all of us, ma'am.
Okay, now this is what I say all the time when designing an intervention. Now, before that, you already have all the information that you want. You already have the function, you have the hypothesis, you have the behavior. Now you can design an intervention. So what do you need to look at in intervention? To me, the very first thing I look at is the environment. Maybe the problem is caused by the environment, or probably if you manipulate the antecedent or manipulate the environment, that will solve the problem. Example, one student, he does not want to stay put in class. He does not want to stay put in class. That's why you cannot teach her. Now, the problem is, without you realizing, is he does not want to sit near the window because of the sunlight. So if you just transfer the kid, that is manipulating the environment. If you transfer the kid, then you don't need to do an intervention anymore. So that's the very first thing you do. You check the environment. Is there something in the environment that hinders the learning? So you check the environment. Okay, now, once you check the environment, you check what is the problem behavior. Now, you found out what is the problem behavior. Now, the next step is, what is your desired behavior? Now, if you cannot achieve the desired behavior, what is the alternative behavior? Okay, now, once you have that, once you have the desired behavior, alternative behavior, then you can come up with an intervention. Example, can you give me a behavior? Example of behavior is, can we think of a behavior? Okay, pinching classmate, pinching classmate to get attention. For example, that is the behavior. Pinching classmate, pinching, okay, shouting. Okay, Dawa, okay, shouting in class. For example, that is the behavior, shouting in class. Now, what is our desired behavior? Our desired behavior is for the child not to shout in class. Okay. Now, that is difficult to achieve right away. So what do? We need an alternative behavior. What is an alternative behavior? Now, I assume that the shouting in class, the child wants attention. So if the child wants attention, the alternative behavior is for the child to raise her hand if she wants to talk. So that is an alternative behavior. Then we can design our intervention based on that. So how do we teach that? Now we will try to come up with an intervention, a very short intervention, just to address that behavior. Okay, shouting in class. So now shouting, how do we address that? The child wants attention. To address that, we do not give the child attention. So number one, address that, planned ignoring. We will ignore the child. Number two, alternative behavior. What is the alternative behavior? Number three, non-contingent reinforcement. If the child doesn't shout, we give her social praises all the time. Oh, you did not shout, you did not shout, like every 10 minutes, good job, good job. So again, that is another form of intervention. See, and then what do we do after that? Now, how do we reinforce the child? So every time the child does the alternative behavior, then we will reinforce the child. So how do we reinforce the child? Now we can social praises. We can give her tokens. We can give her like star. We can give her some smiley stamp. So there are so many things we need to do. So again, check the behavior. What is your desired behavior? What is your alternative behavior? And then from there, you can design your intervention program. And then you can use various techniques. Again, choose techniques that are evidence-based.
Thank you, ma'am, for making it very crisp for us, even though the topic in itself is huge in itself. Next, we have another question on similar lines. So right after assessment and intervention, you also spoke about the collaboration between parents, teachers for the child's development, right? So we have a lot of questions on those lines from Ms. Deborah, Ms. Adela, Jelena, who wants to know that what if some parents are very apprehensive and not ready to take the child for assessment? Or sometimes even when the teachers are actually putting a view forward that the child would need some form of assessment, not every parent is okay with the concept. So how is that teachers can go about in orienting parents and developing the sense of acceptance in Bangla?
Okay, that is our greatest challenge. Okay, that is regardless wherever country you are in, that is the greatest challenge. Now, our limitation as a teacher is that if the parents do not want to go for assessment, there is nothing we can do. But the best we can do is you try to explain it to them. Okay, now this is the key. This is the key word. You explain it to them in a language that they can understand. Sometimes the parents, they don't go for assessment. They don't go for assessment because they do not know what they are getting into. They do not understand. And also they get intimidated. They get intimidated by the high words, the very profound words. No, the key there is number one is awareness, like Dawa again said, awareness. Thank you, Dawa, that's very good. Awareness. And then number two, you explain it to them in a language that they can understand. Okay, and you present yourself as someone who cares, not someone who is condescending. No. Now, feedback. Now, again, can Nika care feedback? Yes, feedback is very important. In everything we do, we need feedback. And there are different kinds of feedback, but the most effective one are the immediate feedback. So, okay, now where did this feedback come in? Now, you can tell the parents, if we do this, this is what we do. And then if you do that, this is my feedback. So you tell them the advantages, the disadvantages. You use your charm, use your initiative. You know, you use your power of communication to encourage the parents that assessment is very, very good for the child. But again, in explaining, you have to explain it in a language that they can understand. Because if they cannot understand your explanation, no way that you can get their approval or permission to do assessment.
Wonderful, ma'am. Keeping it very simple, specific, and to the point as a key so that
Yes.
the parents realize the importance of it. Next, we have a question from Miss Myra Khan, who wants to know how long will each of the assessment take? Like, for example, we discussed a lot of direct assessment, indirect assessment tools, right? So what is the approximation number of time or approximation in the terms of number of sessions that is required for the whole assessment to get completed, ma'am?
Okay, again, that is challenging. It varies. When I do my assessment, sometimes in 2 hours, 4 hours, I can get the data that I want. For some kids, 2 days, 3 days, I still do not get the data that I want. See, the key there is you have to know, again, the behavior, and you have to know what data do you need. If you think you have enough data for you to interpret the behavior and for you to validate the hypothesis, and if you have enough data that you think you can design an intervention, and then so be it. But first, you have to determine, okay, how many data points do you need? It depends. Again, some kids, they participate. Some kids, you've been sitting there or doing things for 1 hour, you still do not get any one data point. So it all depends.
Thank you, ma'am, for throwing light on that. Next, we have another question from most of our teachers who are actually dealing with children in an online setup. They want to know, sometimes the children, because the online classes are happening, they don't tend to find the child because everybody's video is off. The child tends to go away. So in those cases, what are certain things that teachers can be mindful of to help children with special needs specifically?
Let me clarify that during the online session, the parents are there. How come the videos are off?
So sometimes what happens, right? Like when there are a lot of children in the classroom setup, not every child would be focused upon during an online session. So there are tendency that some children tend to put their video off, or they tend to give reasons like there is technical issue. And after some times when we are actually checking on the child, there's no response from the other end. So in these cases, what can be done from a teacher's end?
Again, as a teacher, again, that is our limitation. That there is no answer to that, because even us, in the Philippines, that is our limitation. There is no way for us to control the presence of the students, not unless it's a one-on-one instruction. But if it's a group instruction, then it's really, that is a challenge. I hope if you have an answer, please do let me know so I can learn from that also. But as of now, that is our biggest frustration and limitation. We cannot control. If they tell you, okay, I have an internet problem, what will you say?
Yes, ma'am. So there's some limitation to the way of operation because of the online setup also, which we need to keep in mind. Next, we have Ms. Bali, who wants to know that if as a professional, we are doing an assessment and the amount of data that we're able to gather is very limited, incomplete, in those cases, how is that we can draw a conclusion or draw an inference? Will that be accurate?
If really you think that the data is not enough, and then it's not easy. Okay, with the data, assuming that you gathered your data correctly, your issue now is you have an incomplete data. Okay, but you have a data. Now, with that data, again, assuming that it's gathered correctly, accurately, with validity and reliability, you can come up with an inference. Okay, it's not an accurate representation of the behavior, but at least you have something to start on, no? But again, you have to be very, very careful. In those data, though how limited it is, be sure that you can determine the function of the behavior. Because if you cannot determine the function of the behavior, then you cannot, design an effective program. Even if your data is limited, if you can determine the function of the behavior, and then, okay, you can make an inference. Okay, but if you cannot determine the function of the behavior, again, you have to gather data again. Remember the example that we had, the first two examples. If you misread the function, and then you can derive an unwanted behavior.
So, ma'am, in those cases, how is that they can maintain accuracy? Will a peer supervision or something help them on those lines?
Which one is, again, Revati, if
In case if the function is wrongly diagnosed by a professional, so in those cases, what can be done, ma'am?
you can tell, okay, you can tell if the function is wrongly diagnosed. If you can see the behavior is not improving, then something is wrong with the function. You can tell, okay? If it escalates or the trend is going to the direction that you don't want, example, you want to increase the behavior, but in your intervention, the behavior is decreasing. Or if you want to decrease the behavior is constantly increasing, then something is wrong there. You need to reassess or you need to gather data again. Because most often, if you get the function right, and then you can address that behavior one way or the other.
So getting the functions of the behavior is the
very
key.
important. It's the key. It's really, really very important because the function of the behavior, Rebati, it tells you the why. Why is the child doing that behavior?
Got it, ma'am. Thank you.
Because if you don't know the why, it's so difficult to address the other questions.
Totally understandable, ma'am. The functions is the key as specified by a lot of speakers who come to our platform and mention on the functions of behavior, emphasizing on it. Next, we have a question from Ms. Edrine, who wants to know, we spoke about verbal as well as vocal children, right? Some children are very good in verbal communication, but not good with vocals. So what is the reason for it? And what can we as teachers or special educators do to help the child improve?
So what is it? They are good verbally, but?
Yeah, but have difficulty in their vocals.
In their vocals or?
Yeah, they're good verbally. Some children are good with your verbal skills, but not with your vocal part.
What does that mean? They can speak, but they cannot express themselves?
No, they're able to express themselves either using gestures, signs, or things like that, but not able to vocalize it.
Then probably, first you have to check, do they have a speech defect? Do they have problem with their speech? Not unless, okay, if the question is, the child can speak, now probably Revati, maybe the question is, the child can speak, but she would rather use non-verbal communication. Do you think that's a better phrasing of the question?
Yes, ma'am, I would agree to it. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me rephrase that. The child can speak vocally, but the child prefers to use other means of communication. Okay. Now, again, we have to go back again to generalization. So generalization is, again, teaching the child to be able to perform behavior in different function in different settings. That also happens to us. I'll tell you the example. Example as, okay, when we go for the exam, we prepare, we study, we read, we study our lessons very well. But during the exam, we forget everything. Okay, this doesn't mean that we did not study, we did. But the problem is we cannot generalize. When the setting changed, we cannot answer anymore. In the same manner as job interview, when we go for a job interview, we prepare, we get ready, we prepare ourselves, we practice. But during our interview, we are tongue-tied. We cannot speak anymore. Why? Because of our inability to generalize. That's why generalization is important. Again, example of generalization. It happens in the class all the time. The parent will go to the teacher and the teacher says, how come my son cannot even recite the ABC, the alphabet, and my son is with you for 1 year? And the teacher says, no, in my class, your son is very good. He can recite the ABC forward and backward. And the mother said, how come at home, no? Now, does the child know his ABC or not? Yes, the child knows his ABC or not, but the child has no ability to generalize, meaning he can only recite that ABC with the teacher, not with the parents. That's why when I teach, I see to it that the child can generalize. I teach them ABC in school. I teach them ABC in the classroom, outside the classroom, in the canteen, in the playground. I teach them ABC. And then I teach them ABC. I ask my co-teacher to teach them ABC. I ask the others, their classmates, to ask them to recite ABC. This is a form of generalization. Now, there's a question here. How to improve generalization? Generalization is practicing the child in a different setting, different individual with different settings. So
practice is the key to generalization. As you mentioned, even for adults, if it is very difficult to practice a new skill and actually put it into practice in different settings, for child it would be very, very difficult.
yeah.
So repeated practice is the key for generalization.
Yeah. Practice in different setting with different people.
Okay, so there's also an element to it. It's just not general practice, but practice in different settings with different audience is the key to it.
Different audience, different setting, anything different, just to generalize them.
Okay, wonderful. Ma'am, next we have a question from Nusna, who wants to know if we feel that the child has certain delays or difficulties and we are observing that in the classroom. So as teachers, is it okay, or even as professionals, is it okay for us to directly go and take the child in for assessment without the permission of the parents?
No, that's a no. You can be sued for that. First, the very, very first thing is you get the permission of the parent. No, without the parent permission, preferably written permission from the parent that the child needs an assessment. If they agree, yes, we can do that. No, because sometimes we know there is that, as a teacher, there is that willingness to help. There is this willingness to help, but sometimes, it can get us into trouble.
Agreed, ma'am. So on the other line of the spectrum, there's a question from Ms. Mili Shrishta, who wants to know, okay, if the parent is ready to do an assessment for the child and they feel that it's very important, but the school setup is not agreeing to it. So what a parent can do in those situations?
No, they can do what they think is best for their child. Because again, you have to remember the last say is always the parent. No matter what we say, no matter what we do, if they say no, there's nothing we can do. Also, if they say, I want to do this to my child, and we say no, they, always remember that the end decision will always be with the parents. That's why I don't recommend, my dear teachers, wherever you are, whichever country you are in, do not volunteer assessment, not unless there is a parental consent or whoever is the caregiver of the child.
Thanks, ma'am, for throwing light on the importance of parental consent per se. We have a lot of questions in terms of intervention. So we'll take a broader one on those lines. One is that if a child is actually repeatedly engaging in echolalia, where the child is repeating the same thing over and over again, what can a teacher do in a classroom setup to help the child?
Okay, now, echolalia is very important. See how we can make a mistake if we don't get the function of the behavior with the echolalia. Okay, first, now, echolalia. Now, first you have to check what is the function of the echolalia. Is it sensory? Because the child has sensory issues. Or number two, is it a way of the child to get attention? Or is it a way of the child to escape something? Now again, get the medical diagnosis. Is it really an echolalia or is it a vocal tic? See, there is a very big difference between an echolalia and a vocal tic. Okay, a vocal, an echolalia is sensorial. Okay, a vocal tic is how shall I say? Is it? No, it's not physical. It's neurological. It is a neurological. I think it's a neurological problem. Now, how can you tell the difference? Okay, how can you tell the difference if it is a vocal tic or is it an echolalia? Okay, now, again, this is from me. There is no how shall I say this? This is just based on my experience. How can you tell between vocal tic? Yeah, vocal tic is neurological, according to Dr. Rajni Sharma. Thank you so much. Vocal tic is neurological. So how can you tell the difference between a vocal tic and echolalia? Okay, again, this is based, there is no scientific basis, but this is what I do based on my experience. Okay, when it is a vocal tic and you ask the child to stop, there is an intent to stop, but the child cannot control it. See, there is an intent, there is an intention to stop, but the child cannot stop. Okay, now, if it is echolalia, which is sensorial, if you ask the child to stop, he does not want to stop. See the difference? If it is sensorial, now vocal tic may be voluntary. Yes, thank you again, Dr. Sharma. It can be voluntary. Now, for vocal tic, now from the behavioral, Dr. Rajni, I'm talking from the behavioral perspective. Okay, thank you for the input. Now, echolalia, Mitali Sharma said, echolalia is repetition of whatever is heard earlier, but not vocal tic. Yes, vocal tic could also be that. Okay, so now, regardless of, there is, you know, this is how I check it. No, if the child does not want to stop, and then it is sensorial. If the child wants to stop but he cannot stop, then it's a vocal tic. So you have to determine again first what is it before you design your intervention.
So I think that's where the key comprehensive assessment plays a role, which will give you a proper identification in terms of what
now, let me clarify this. My answer is not based on a medical perspective because I'm not, that is my limitation. It is just from a behavioral perspective and from my own experience. So that is just my observation. Okay. So again, it's not scientifically proven and it's not medical. That is just based on my personal experience and observation. Thank you so much for all the various input.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Let's take the last question for today. There's a question like we discussed about the vocal and the verbal aspect of children, right? So in those cases, when a child is not vocal and has difficulty to express themselves vocally, can a parent or a teacher engage in prompting? If
yes,
so, for how long?
Yeah, of course. Now, what is prompting first? What is prompting? Prompting is an assistance. Okay, prompting is assistance. There are different kinds of prompting. Okay, there are different kinds of prompting. There is the response prompting and there is a stimulus prompting. What is a response prompting? We encourage the child to respond. So response prompting are modeling. You model and the child will copy. Okay, physical prompting, you physically assist the child. Okay, and verbal prompting is we prompt the child verbally. Those are the response prompting. Now, what is a stimulus prompting? We help the child by maneuvering the stimulus. How? Okay, positional. We position the stimulus close to child. For example, you want the child to choose the letter A from an array of ABC, and he does not know. So you position the letter A closer to the child. That is positional prompting. Okay, another one is gestural of movement prompting. You point letter A. That is positional. So another one is within stimulus. You put a star. You put a star, or you put you write something for the child for her to identify letter A. So again, that is stimulus prompting. So prompting, yes, you can use prompting is very helpful. In fact, we have been using it already, only we do not know the name. So now I will tell you prompting. See, you have the response prompting and stimulus prompting. Response prompting, you work on the response of the child. So what are they? Modeling, verbal and physical. And then we have the stimulus prompting. The stimulus prompting is again positional, movement, and then within stimulus and redundancy. So you can use any prompt that you want. And then there are also different techniques from most to least, least to most. It depends on what you are teaching. So prompting is very good. It is used for errorless learning. If you want the child not to commit error, then you use prompting.
Wonderful, ma'am. What is so beautiful about your session is you are giving us the whole facets of the different components that's involved either in an assessment or in a tool or even in a technique. That is so fascinating to know from you, ma'am. As a last question to that of prompting that we're talking about. So once we are using prompting with children, so how is that we can fade it? Because sometimes the child will get so used to prompting.
Yeah.
So how is that we can fade it? If you could share an insight, and after that we'll close the Q&A session.
Very good. That's a very good. Now, when you do prompting, you have to keep in mind with the prompting is how to fade prompting. No? Because there is such thing as prompt dependency. There are children who are so used of prompting already that they don't want to do anything without you giving the go signal. Okay, so let us avoid prompt dependency by fading the prompt. So how do we fade the prompt? We have the stimulus fading prompt. So what is stimulus fading prompt? Example, again, in writing letter A. Now we write A. Now, how do we fade letter A? Okay, so we will use first a stimulus. We will use within prompt, stimulus prompt. Okay, letter A. So how do we fade that? Initially, we help the child hand over hand. We will write A. And then the next, the child will just trace the broken lines of letter A. Then next, just the dots. Okay, and then next one, just 3 dots until the child can write A without any prompt. So that is a form of stimulus prompt. Now, let us try to use response prompt. Example. Now, in writing letter A, hand over hand, that's physical prompt. You prompt the child to write A. And then next, you remove the physical prompt. You write A, the child will copy A. And then the verbal prompt, you tell the child, you write A. Then the child will write A. So again, that is prompt fading. So again, that's why I don't approve of it, that, you know, everything, every time the child something, okay, the teacher will assist the child right away. No, you are not helping the child. You only use prompt to assist, but you always avoid prompt dependency, because prompt dependency, it's so difficult to fade.
Wonderful, ma'am. Very beautifully put. From today's session, we have a lot of takeaways from you. Your knowledgeable sharing in terms of the different components that are involved in a single aspect is quite fascinating to know. Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing all your inputs, your sharing your insights with all of us today. And thank you all participants for actively participating, for sharing your inputs from your end to actually keep the session engaging throughout. Ma'am, your final words to all our participants today.
Okay, again, thank you so much. Like I said earlier, your quest for knowledge is highly, highly commendable. And I would like to thank Ability for giving me a platform to share with you what I am passionate the most, which is special education. Okay, so again, please, you have to consider, again, identifying problem behavior, assessment, before you design an intervention. Again, no matter how good your intervention is, no matter how good your program design is, if it is not addressing the correct behavior, then we will just be frustrated in the end. So again, let us do our job passionately, and hopefully we can make a difference in the life of a special child. Thank you,
so
everyone. Thank you for your time, and it's an honor to be here as always.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your final words. I've seen that the feedback link is already being shared with you all. I'll request my team member to again drop the feedback link. Do take a moment out and let us know how effective this session was for you, so that we will be able to improve the experience for all of you all. And don't forget to register yourself for the upcoming events from Team Ability. We're going to start with our module 3 very, very soon from October 7th. So do book your slots, and don't forget to share the same with fellow friends, so that we can all continue to learn and grow together. Until we see you for the next time, it's a big bye from Team Ability. Stay safe and take care, all of you.
Thank you, everyone.